All right, we'll be in chapter 10 again today of 1 Corinthians. I want to challenge you with something before we get started. Look around. Look around. What do you see? I count, 12 people? We're not going to wear out these pews, not this way, that's for sure. Anyway, just an observation. It must be my teaching, maybe I'm driving people away. I remember back in the day, certain people in here said there's too many people in that class. That was for young people. I know. There's people in there now old enough to be grandparents. Whatever. Anyway, just an observation. Chapter 10, 1 Corinthians. So far in chapter 10, we've read where Paul is writing to these Corinthians about the warnings from ancient Israel. What happened during the wanderings in ancient Israel? Well, obviously they wandered. We know why they wandered, 40 years for disobedience and rebellion. But while they were there, they committed pagan revelry, the calf. There was idolatry, sexual immorality, and there was grumbling. Those are three things that I think we mentioned last week. And what was the consequence of those sinful behaviors? That's part of it. But while they were wandering, these things happened. They had the blessings of the guidance of God in the pillar and in the cloud of smoke. But despite that, of the original group that left Egypt, how many actually saw the promised land? 2. The sins that they committed while they were wandering met consequences of death and disease, plagues. We mentioned, 24,000. There in verse 8. Well, he says there are 23,000. We talked about that, round numbers. You shouldn't grumble. We talked about Korah's rebellion. God told Moses, tell the people to get back. The earth opened up, swallowed Korah. Consequences for sinful behavior. In our lifetimes, and I can't attribute, problems in this world, strife, catastrophes, death. I can't attribute those outright to sinful behavior, but we know that those things do exist because of sin in the world that happened way back, in the Garden of Eden. Part of the curse of sin, or the curse because of sin. So anyway, the warnings from ancient Israel are just as real to those Christians as they should be to us as well. We perpetuate sin from one generation to the next. We pay the consequences of that. I personally think that we're seeing consequences of that in our culture today. No different than the Romans did, or the Greeks, or the Assyrians, or the Babylonians. You think about those cultures and their destiny and why it happened. There's a whole bunch of reasons. They say that the death of a culture happens from within. Might be. Certainly, you can put your finger on reasons why a collapse of a culture can happen. Because of the degradation of morals within a culture. Disease, all of those things that are direct consequences of sin. Part of God's judgment? Perhaps. I can't say absolutely yes or absolutely no. In any case, we should take heed of the warnings here that Paul gives these Corinthians. So when we left off last week, we were talking about the atmosphere of pagan idol worship, and Paul, in closing verses, what we looked at last week, he compares communion, the atmosphere of communion. There's a parallel there between that and pagan worship, as in what you eat, and drink during a pagan ceremony, i.e. idol worship, what you eat means something. Specifically, he was talking about the meat that had been sacrificed to idols. The question was, as we know from the Corinthians, is it okay or not to eat meat sacrificed to idols? So Paul's making that parallel. There's one cup and there's one loaf. In the context of communion, that means something. If you were to take that loaf off the shelf at Food Lion or the grape juice off the shelf, it's just grape juice and bread. In the atmosphere of communion, they take on a different meaning, just like a chunk of meat would. Out of the grocer's, or the meat counter, it's just a chunk of meat. If that meat is used during pagan worship, then it becomes something different. And so Paul's going to elaborate on that, and we'll get into more of that today, because these Corinthians want to know. Some commentators say that Corinthians want to know answers to these questions because how far can I go and still enjoy meat? These guys were carnivores. I'm a carnivore. I like meat. I don't want to have restrictions put on what kind of meat and when I can eat it. That's essentially what's going on here. In that culture, these Christians were constantly influenced by the pagan practices going on around them. Exemplified in one situation specifically here by the meat. It was available if you were practicing pagan worship, for one. Apparently there were restaurants, places you could go and sit down and eat within the pagan temple, not specifically, worshiping idols. And then you could go in the public restaurant. Any leftover meat that wasn't used for the ceremonies, whatever, worship, could be bought at your local grocery store, so to speak. So these Corinthians want to know, what are the limits on eating this meat? When and where can I eat this meat? Is it to test the boundaries of sinful behavior, or is it to legitimately know what can I do and not be sinning against God? In either case, Paul outlines some boundaries. So continuing on over there in, chapter 23. Verse 23 of chapter 10. Everything is permissible. This was a comment that the Corinthians had made in a previous letter to Paul. That's why it's in quotations. Everything is permissible in their minds, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible, but not everything is constructive. Nobody should seek his own good, but the good of others. And this is the theme that Paul has been talking about here throughout chapter 10. We should have other people's interest in mind, not just our own. And he's talking specifically about eating this meat sacrificed to idols in the presence of a weaker Christian. And what was the problem here? Why would that be a problem? It's a bad example because you are wounding the conscience of the weaker Christian. For a mature Christian, it's not a problem. An idol is nothing. And we talked about this a couple times before, knowledge versus love. If you're motivated by knowledge, eat all the meat when and where you want to. It's not a problem. In the presence of a weaker Christian, though, it might wound their conscience, and we said in so doing, you're sinning against Christ. So that's the problem. You're sinning against Christ. If you know an idol is nothing, then the meat sacrificed to idols means nothing. It's just meat, it's edible. We're New Testament believers. In the Christian era, we know from Christ's teaching, I should have wrote it down, but I didn't, elsewhere in Scripture, what food is good to eat. Everything that God has created is good for food. What defiles a man? Not what goes in his mouth and in his stomach, but what spews out of his mouth is what makes a man or woman unclean. So in the New Testament era, all food is good to eat. There's no prohibitions. like there was in the Old Testament times. So anyway, for the mature Christian, eating this meat in the company of other mature Christians should not present any problem at all with sin. If you do it in the company or in the presence of weaker, immature Christians, then that's a problem, because you could wound their conscience. For them, it's sinful. I shouldn't be doing this because it was sacrificed to idols. As they mature and understand more fully that an idol is nothing, yes, there might come a point when that person can eat meat without conflict in their conscience whatsoever. Okay, so we should still be motivated by the good of others. Paul is saying there in verse 24. Eat anything. Now these are the limitations, and the freedoms Paul gives to these people. Eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. That's just what I said. It's all good food to eat. It's not attached to anything. It's meat. It's food. It's good. You should buy it, take it home, and enjoy it if you buy it in the market. If some unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go, eat whatever is put before you and without raising questions of conscience. Paul's not putting on limits here or restrictions on whom we should eat with. It's a good thing to go eat with unbelievers. Why? Why is that a good thing? Huh? You might win them. It gives you an opportunity to witness to these people. That doesn't mean you should go to an unbeliever's house and get drunk, as we talked about before, being in the company of people at a bar or whatever. That means you should go, as Jesus went to the house of sinners, in the Pharisees' eyes, to win them over, to point them to God, not become like them. Big difference. So if an unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go, eat whatever's put before you without raising questions of conscience. But if anyone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it, both for the sake of the man who told you and for the conscience sake. The other man's conscience, I mean, not yours. For why should my freedom be judged by another's conscience? So if you go to an unbeliever's house and they put out a meal of meat, in this case, enjoy it. Don't ask questions. However, if somebody does say, whoa, this meat's been offered for sacrifice over at the pagan temple, Paul here is consistent with what he stated before. Remember, I'll never eat meat again if it causes somebody to stumble. In this situation, if a question is raised about the origin of this meat, then let it go. Don't eat it. It's really simple. Not for your sake, but for the sake of the weaker conscience, is what he's saying. He goes on there, why should I be judged by somebody else's conscience? In this situation, he's saying, why should I be judged by the weaker conscience? That makes no sense. If anything, it should be the other way around, if there's room for judgment at all. So, for the sake of somebody else's conscience, that is the conscience of the weaker Christian, then forego the meat. It's no big deal. If I take part in a meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for? There again, if it's good food, you should be thankful for it and enjoy it. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, the church of God, even as I try to please everybody in every way, for I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many. Did you ever try to please everybody? This is a hard teaching. Huh? How many people can you please at one time? One. Y'all got to please each other. Yeah. It all depends. It's hard to please everybody. Paul has set his standard of behavior for trying to be everything to everybody. We read that a couple of weeks ago. He's everything to everybody, as much as humanly possible, for the sake of not being like them, but for the sake of winning them. That's always been his goal. That's what's behind his drive, is to win people to Christ. So when you think that you're trying to please somebody and it can't be done, don't lose a whole lot of sleep over that, and just try to please as many people as you can, I suppose. There's something I found since I graduated from college years ago. I started out at the bottom. I did, and I worked my way up. I left Tyson as general manager of my region. You can't please everybody. Can't be done. Cannot be done. In church leadership, to try to please everybody, can't be done. My dad used to tell me, he said, son, 50% is about the best you're going to do. Half will be in favor of whatever decision you make, and half is going to be against you. Endure it. That's the way it is. Generally speaking, in a leadership position, if you are in, or if everybody agrees with what you're doing, you're probably not doing your job. You were in the Army in a leadership capacity. Did you please everybody? You was the boss. Who's our boss? Yeah, we get into that a little bit more here directly as a matter of authority and responsibility. Huh? But when you're in a position of authority and have people that you report to as well, man, you're constantly juggling, you know. You got to stick with your conscience and what's right and what's wrong. Try to compromise, though, and you're going to make enemies and, you know, make mistakes as well. So anyway, any questions about chapter 10? All right. I did have something here I wanted to spend a little bit of time on. I don't want to get in a debate about this because depending upon your interpretation of Scripture, you might see things differently than maybe I teach it. And frankly, when I went through studying some of the stuff, both chapter 10 and 11 in particular, it can get kind of fuzzy, sort of, depending on your persuasion. You know, there's evidence, scriptural evidence for both sides of the thing. But what I want to talk about in particular is this idea of sacrificing meat to idols, and is it okay to eat that meat or not? That was the big question Paul was answering here with the Corinthians. Most of us, I would rather say, none of us in our lifetime have been tempted to eat meat that was sacrificed to idols. Anybody here been to such a situation? I haven't, no. There are parallels, though, in modern America. One specifically that I have heard contention over is money and where the church money comes from. If you knew that the church got a check, pick amount, 10 grand, 20 grand, whatever, written to Cabin Swamp Church, you knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that was money generated from bad behavior by a corrupt politician. Should the church have that money, yes or no? Oh, yes. Good. I agree. Why? Does money have a conscience? Does a chunk of meat have a conscience? Can you see where I'm making a parallel here? Does that make sense? In some people's mind, I've heard it come out of their mouth. We shouldn't be using that money because it was generated from drugs or whatever. Money has no conscience. It's a tool.
Well, in that case, you couldn't use any of the money we get.
Exactly. Exactly. You know, we could extrapolate, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time there. Do guns have a conscience? Mm-mm. You know where I'm going with this. I'm not going to go any further. Exactly. Now I'm going to stretch this a little further because this hits closer to home. I shouldn't say it, but I am a church leader, and I am teaching, and I think there's a parallel, so I'm going to say it anyway. The gift boxes. What was it called? Samaritan's Purse? I know there's some people in this congregation didn't like that. And there were some who, yeah, were all behind it. I don't know where the balance is, really, but if we focus on who sponsors that organization rather than the good that it does to little kids running around barefoot, if it does good, and if there's an organization in place and it has the infrastructure to distribute this stuff, and it does good, whoever sponsors it, what difference does it make? Does it make a difference? Am I wrong?
A lot of times I'm in the same position as far as my eating. Eyes are on me. I don't always make the best choices, but I like salad. I like cauliflower. You know, there are a lot of things that I like. I also like sweets, but there are times when I might take a piece of cake or especially ice cream and buy Wendy's. Oh yeah. But if I was with a diabetic who I knew struggled with keeping their blood sugar straight, I would never
Sure.
that in front of them because I'd be giving the wrong message to them.
If you can handle it, it's one thing, but they may not be able to handle it, and you're contributing. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I know
Sure.
I'm watching my blood sugar and I know. So I have to be careful. And not that I sneak around in back of the door and do stuff, but yeah, the other day we were at Wendy's and I gave enough insulin to have a Frosty. Thought I was going to have a Frosty. Well, after we finished the meal, I went up to get my Frosty, and the girl turned around and she says, "I'll be with you in a minute." And she saw that keychain thing. The Frosty's about like that. One my size. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry. We don't have those today. The machine's broken." Brad said, "What you gonna do now?" I said, "Well, you know, when it starts going low, then I'll find something. I got a peppermint in my pocket."
And that's good. We as Christians should have an awareness of our surroundings and who might be watching. Somebody's always watching. And you're going to offend somebody along the way quite often. Well, there is a balance there somewhere. I know. And that's what I was talking about last week or the week before. I don't have a healthy view of the limits put on me because of somebody else is going to be offended because whatever I might do is on their list. You know what I mean? But even so, there's a lot of good that can come through church programs that not everybody will agree with because of who sponsors it. If this mainstream Can I say Baptist? Sponsor Samaritan's Purse. So what? The good that it does, I think, should tip that scales. You think God doesn't know what's going on? Of course He does. So why do we have hang-ups about details like that? Maybe I'm way out in left field on this. I don't know. There have been things that the elders said, no, we're not going to do. Organizations wanted to use the facilities next door. I was one of them. Nope, don't want to do that. Because of what that organization stands for and supports. I don't want any part of it. That's just me. So maybe I'm not consistent in my thinking. However,
I think there's a difference there. Take Mr. Stevens' example. If Hooters wants to have their waitresses give whatever and then give money, that's one thing. If we dress our youngins in scantily clad and had them washing cars out front, that's an entirely different problem.
okay, good point. Yeah. I've been forbade to go to Hooters. So, hey. It's food, right?
I haven't been in many, many years, but I did go when I lived in Virginia, and the hamburgers there were fantastic.
Anyway, moving on. Let's see. As far as dirty money, I found this to be interesting. I've read about, research done on distribution of money. It's complicated. It's a real math challenge. Everybody in here, if you carry a billfold, I don't. I have a dollar bill or two in my billfold. The last study I saw was February 2024. It was a Center for Forensic Science Research did a study. And I won't give you all the details. You can look it up for yourself to get the abstract. It's kind of complicated. But anyway, in essence, they took money, $188, I think was the total, $1 bills from 13 different cities across the United States. I don't know if Alaska was included, but Hawaii was one. And they, took it from different parts geographically. They analyzed what was on those dollar bills. 100% of all $188 had either fentanyl, cocaine, and meth in different percentages. Cocaine they found on 100% of the dollar bills. You say, well, there could be a bias. Okay. What I did, there's dozens of these studies that have been done, dating back to the late 80s or whatever, all the way, like I said, 2024. You think that your money hasn't been used for illicit activities? Think again. And then that's one argument. Well, there's other things on that money, too. Human waste. There you go. Use your imagination. On paper money. It's dirty. It's dirty money. There's a movement, to get rid of paper money and coins, go strictly to plastic, and electronic and all that stuff. So I was going to propose here today, if you want to get rid of your dirty money, I will take it for you and hold it for about 10 years just to make sure it's clean, And at that time, if I'm still around, you can have it back, right? Put it in the washing machine. There you go. But your body is wonderfully created to combat that filth too. So, I'm not going to worry too much about it. But what I'm saying is, and reflection of what you said, what money are we going to use if it hasn't been used for evil? It's a tool. It's part of our culture. It's what we do. We use that money. There again, you think God doesn't know what's going on? Sure He does. Let's see. So that's all I'm going to say about that. So where do modern Christians fit in? I think we fit in very well with the Corinthians, and we can take warnings from the ancient Israelites, and we can be motivated, should be motivated by the best interest of others. You know, all these things are what Paul's talking about here. And let's not go too overboard looking at where things originate rather than looking at the good that they can do. Good can come from dirty money all day long. Where did it come from? You told me the Salvation Army, the quote, "Devil's had it long enough, it's time for God to use it," or something like that.
Yeah, it's music in their case.
Yeah.
Because they were taking popular drinking songs in the early days and rewording them. And one of the preachers was like, "I haven't heard that tune before. What is it? Where's it come from?" And she had to admit that it was a drinking song. And he very well, "Devil's had that song long enough. We'll use it." They just changed the word.
All right. Any other thoughts on that? There's a proper balance somewhere, and that's, up to the individual. I don't have any problem using money that was used yesterday for buying drugs. I have no problem with that whatsoever. If God can use it for good things in His kingdom, then so be it.
God knows what your intentions are. So whatever your intentions are,
Sure.
I think that should serve.
I agree. We don't have to dress like Hooters. Good point. Yeah. We don't have to be involved with the drug trade. Let somebody else give us that money. That's fine. Anyway, let's go on then. Chapter 11. Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Wow. If anybody in here said that, we might be inclined to say that's a pretty audacious statement. Follow me as I follow Christ. Our general thinking, and rightly so, is we should just follow Christ. Don't follow me or him or Steve or anybody else. Just follow Christ. Paul can say this with a clear conscience, and it's the audience he's saying this to as well. These are new Christians. He would not be writing this letter in bulk if it wasn't for correction, okay? He's not writing this as a attaboy. Parts of it, yes, and we'll get to that here directly. But for the most part, 1st and 2nd Corinthians addresses problems in that Corinthian church that need to be corrected. And that's what Paul does. That's the audience he is writing to. So he can say with clear conscience to these new Christians, I know what Christ wants. I met him on the road to Damascus. He has told me, he doesn't say this specifically in as many words, but I get divine revelation. God has taken me places, to the heavens in a dream or whatever. He has showed me this is what you're supposed to be doing. This is how you're supposed to be doing it. Paul knows that. He's confident in that. So he can say to this audience, these new Corinthians, follow me as I follow Christ's example. It's legit. I don't know if that would be true for, certainly not me. I make a bunch of mistakes. The other part of this thing, as I follow the example of Christ. Paul is human like everybody else. Is he fallible? Sure. He's not perfect. But insofar as he follows Christ's directives, then yes, follow Paul as an example.
He could point to as an example because he started that church.
Sure.
For a year and a half plus. They could say, this is how Paul operated on Passover. This is how Paul did when he preached. This is how Paul did when he was in the marketplace. They could remember it. He's their spiritual father, so it wasn't. These folks never saw Christ, but they saw Paul, and he's like, I'm following Jesus. See that in me, and you've seen it. Do it too.
And that's a good point you bring up. This is the Paul that they have seen as Paul. They have not seen Saul. You remember early on, over there in Acts, I can't remember where it was. I didn't think of it till you just brought it up. Some people had question. Whoa, aren't you the one that, persecuting everything? And had we seen that prior Paul, we might have the same question. Do I really need to be following you, But these people, as you point out, saw the founding father of their congregation. They knew what he was about. He was consistent in what not only he was showing by example, but what he was writing them as well. I think Paul was absolutely sincere. I would give up meat forever. I believe he was the kind of guy who would do that. And I think they knew that too. They could see it. Anyway, continuing on, verse 2, I praise you for remembering me in everything and for holding to the teachings just as I passed them on to you. This gets into the area that I call depending upon your persuasion and how you interpret and what commentaries you read and what preachers you listen to. Some commentaries say that verse 2 here is biting sarcasm. I don't think so. Because elsewhere in Scripture, or in this chapter 11, he says, I don't praise you. So he can say, I praise and I don't praise. So I think it's sincere. In this situation, he's praising. That and the previous sentence, follow me as I follow Christ. Why would he, on the heels of that statement, offer sarcasm? It doesn't make any sense. So, I read commentaries. In fact, this guy that I've reprinted here says this is biting sarcasm. Joe doesn't think so. I think he's legitimately, sincerely praising them for remembering him and his teachings. Not the teachings that go back for generations. He's talking about the teachings that he brought to them in the last year and a half or so since he founded that congregation. Talking about Christ-likeness and so forth.
I think it follows with the theme of all of Corinthians thus far as he refers to them in friendly terms, but sometimes your friends need correction.
Sure.
He calls them brothers, and been doing good here, but the stuff you're asking about, I need to fix. So I think it's like a youngin'. In that if you are just down on them all the time and they can never do anything right, they're going to stop listening to you after a while. But if you balance, you did good here, we can work here to improve, they're going to listen to you a little bit more instead of just shutting you down whenever you say something to them.
Sure. He had plenty to criticize.
Oh, yeah.
And he could have gone on and on and on criticizing. There's enough criticism in, 1st and 2nd Corinthians. So, yeah, I think it's legit. Sincerely, he's praising them for the good stuff. And later on here we'll read that I don't praise you because of this. And we'll get to that. Now I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, and every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is just as though her head were shaved. Kind of switches gears here. He's in these verses 3 and 4 and 5 is establishing a foundation for further teaching. So what he's saying here with regard to God-ordered responsibility, authority, accountability, if you will, the things that he's going to talk about later on, the following verses and chapters, bears upon this God-ordered authority. Never, never would I say inferior and superior. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about God-ordered authority, and he justifies that here later on. With regard to head covering, there again, depending on what you read, who you listen to. I'm not fluent in Greek language, culture, or Jewish, or ancient Roman for that matter. But when he's talking about a woman covering her head, there's no discussion in here. Are we talking about something little We're talking about a veil, like you see, on the news with just the eyeballs showing? Is he talking about hair? A woman's hair is her glory. A man's long hair dishonors him. That's what he says. A lot of these sorts of things in our modern culture, we've kind of swept them under the rug. We largely ignore them. And that's another part of the discussion. Was he talking about a temporary set of behaviors for that time, in that era? Or did it transcend, for all Christendom, henceforth should do this? Don't really know. Depends on your persuasion.
I think it's in the pattern of idle meat. I think he points out, he puts everything through the lens of Christ, and that's what you see in verse 2 and 3. And culturally, for them, it wasn't veils, for one, but hair worn a certain way was feminine. Hair that was disheveled or shaved was usually someone who was shamed in some way, whether it's a prostitute or someone who was accused of adultery, which goes back to Jewish practice
Right.
when it comes to suspected adultery. And there's some people that still ball up their head into a bun because that's how they interpret this. But as you get through the rest of this stretch of Scripture, which I know we don't have time for today, he points to, a man looks a certain way and a woman looks a certain way, right? And a man has certain roles in this world, in the church.
Taking away my thunder, man.
Has certain
But that's
roles
okay.
in the church. And you shouldn't be looking like the other one. Which
Sure.
is a long standard thing from way back in.
Exactly. And we're going to talk about that. God, we've talked about this, lessons in the past. God created man, man, woman, woman. I'm not going to get into the argument. I think it's absolutely silly to pretend to be something you're not. That's just me. But, yeah, the fall didn't change that. Getting kicked out of the garden didn't change that. Still man, still woman, still roles. Over there in 1 Timothy, Paul talks about this stuff. Hey, Timothy, you're a young preacher. This is what you need to be preaching, Roles, it's an important thing. It's God ordered. No matter what we think or what we try to make of it, it's God ordered. And there's a very definitive, albeit, perhaps temporary, for that church in that setting, something that they needed to understand and hold on to. We would do well to heed it as, modern Christians.
And he echoes that when he talks about
Sure.
Christ has a role, Father God has a role, the Holy Spirit has a role.
Yeah.
They are co-equal. Women have a role, men have a role, but it doesn't mean a woman is stupider or less godly.
No,
But it does mean they have a role.
exactly. And with that, I think, go ahead.
David Brother set himself up several times when he was preaching for us. One time, I don't know if he was preaching from this or not, but he said something about he didn't like women wearing pantsuits. Well, the women took that to heart and they got together, and one Sunday after that, we all wore hats.
I like the hat thing. I thought that was pretty cool.
But it was just fun,
Sure.